All right, folks, we are ready to begin here. So this evening's class is being put onto YouTube with the others. Has everybody got the notes? I've got a few extra copies up here. Is anybody missing their notes? Yeah, right there. Excellent. Couple. Okay, so we're going to be talking about rooms first. Now, the room object actually has volume associated with it. Room objects need to be put inside a bounded space. So I'm on the Architecture tab here, and I'm going to grab the Room tool. And you'll notice that when you move the room around, here I'm in an unbounded space outside the building, and it just gives me a little small rectangle. But watch what happens when I put it inside the building. So these room objects detect when they are inside bounded space. You guys can see that X, which is what they call the locus of the room object. It allows you to move that room object from one location in the building to another. So for instance, this is the view range tutorial from week 3, which I'm using, and one of the reasons that I'm using it is that it has vaulted space. So here in this section you can see how on the first floor here this vaults right up to the underside of the roof. So again, on the Architecture tab there is the Room tool. So if there are no walls to bound a room inside the building, the room object will take as much space as you give it. So there it is. So after the room has been placed, you can put your cursor anywhere on that X and you can see that the room object can be dragged to another space. It doesn't move the room tag. The room tag just sits where it is, but you can move the room object. Now if I put in a wall, so here I'm going to put in an interior wall. And now just watch what's happened to the room. So here when I click on the X for the room, you can see the room has been truncated because of the presence of this wall. Now, these wall objects and floors and ceilings, they can all be room bounding. So whenever you click on a wall, floor, roof, or ceiling, you're going to see this little checkbox here, room bounding. So if I uncheck this box, you'll now notice that the room object ignores the wall and the room just passes right through it. So that's the room bounding feature. So by default, whenever you place most kinds of walls in Revit, Revit makes them room bounding. Now, if you grab that room object and you drag it across over into another space in the building, it moves the room object and Revit gives you a little warning. It says that the room tag is outside of the room and you either have to turn on the leader or move the room tag. So here I'm going to choose move to room, and you can see that the room has, or the room tag rather, has moved over to the new space. Once you've placed the room, you can name it afterwards and renumber it as well. Now, once you've placed a room and once you've entered this information here, if you delete the room, so here, again, I'm just making sure that the cursor has passed on top of that little X, the locus of the room object, and now if I just delete it, Revit gives you this message. The room is deleted, but its name and its number and any other information that you added to the room object has still been retained. So Revit kind of keeps a record of that room and allows you to put it in at a later time. So for instance, if I use the Room tool right now, you can see I can either place a brand new room object, or up here in the options bar, you can see that I can replace that room which I had deleted. And there it is, it goes back in place. And you're probably wondering, well, okay, why? Well, here's the deal. With the room object, you're going to do things like your finish. So here we might say that we have acoustic tile on the ceilings, and we have rubber base, you know, the typical codes that you see in a finish schedule. Rubber base for the wall base. Wall finish will be gypsum board, gypsum wall board, and our floor finish will be carpet tile. So, you know, you can go to all the trouble of populating these rooms with the information that you're going to see in your room schedule and in your room finish schedule, and then if you just delete the room, you know, you don't want to lose that information. So that's why the developers of the software decided that when you delete a room object, it just kind of gets put back in the box, and then you can come back and pull it out of the box, if you will, at a later date. So I put this room back in, and ta-da, all of the room's information that I had entered will be preserved. Yes, you'd have to do that in a room schedule, so we're going to show you folks schedules later on, and I'll show it to you in a few moments. And so you could delete that row out of your room schedule, and all that information would then go with it. Now, what if you don't have a wall, but you still want to delineate two separate spaces within this part of the building? So you don't have a wall to separate them. How can you separate these room objects if there is no wall in between? Well, on the Architecture tab, we have the Room Separator. So if I use the Room Separator and I just draw that across the room, that now acts as a boundary exactly like a wall would. Now, depending on the template that you used to start your project, the room separation line might appear black, it might appear blue, it might appear solid, it might appear dashed. If you want to change the appearance of this separator line between rooms, that's on the Manage tab, under Additional Settings, and Line Styles. So Line Styles is the dialog where you can set up your different kinds of lines for doing drafting and detailing work, and also for overriding the edges of your objects in views using the line work tool. So your room separation line is right here. So it's got a nice light line weight, and if you want to make it sort of a color that's going to fade more into the background so that when you print it you don't really notice it as much. So here I've made the room separation line blue in the Line Styles dialog box and hit OK. So now you can see it's become a pale blue color. So if you draw some more room separation lines, you can maybe articulate the space a little bit more. So here I'm just going to use the trim command. So now you can see that my room includes that notched area as well. So click on your room and you'll see a toned area where that room's been placed. Now, whenever you use the room tool in your floor plan, Revit will show you in pale blue where you already have room objects placed. So this will presumably help you, or help prevent you from putting two room objects in the same space. So here you can see if you do it anyway, if you put two room objects in the same space, you'll get an error message. You got two rooms in the same region, so you can decide what you want to do in that case. If I just hit OK, well, now I indeed have two rooms in the same space, but the toning is cumulative. So here you can see that because I've got two rooms in this area over here, that it's got a darker shade of blue. So, you know, you don't even have to look that hard to see that there's a problem here. And if you click on one of these room objects now, you get a little warning bubble up on the ribbon, and on this other one here, you don't. And anytime when you click on an object in Revit and you see the show related warnings, it's telling you that there's something wrong with that object. Sometimes the messages are quite benign and sometimes they're quite serious. It's worth having a look just to see what's going on, and this is obviously something that we want to address. So here, if I wanted to sort this out, I could either delete this other room object or I could extend this room separation line across. So now I've got these two rooms in two different spaces, and you'll notice now that when I click on that room object, I don't get an error message up on the Revit. So if I delete a wall or a room separation line between two spaces where rooms are present, I get an error message from Revit as well. Okay, looking at the notes here, what rooms do is they tell objects in your model what room they are in. So if I go and place a desk, if I go and place a desk into a space, that desk will know which room it is in. So because these rooms, they do have a volume associated with them, an object can know, if you will, if it's inside a certain room. So when you go and make a schedule for all of your desks, a furniture schedule, that furniture schedule can report back to you which room this desk is in. Now, rooms themselves, as I said, they're volumetric. So when you click on a room here, it can report to you the volume. And you folks can see here, not computed. So the way it works with rooms is that the area is calculated from wall faces and that the volume is not computed. Now, if for whatever reason you want to have the rooms calculate their area differently and calculate their volume, go to the Architecture tab, and on the Room and Area panel, so here you can see there's this drop-down menu, which allows us to go into the Area and Volume Computations dialog box. This is the only way that you can get access to this dialog in Revit. And in here, Volume Computations. Areas only faster, or if you want it to calculate volumes, switch modes. Not really a problem unless you're on a really big project, and on a large project it can make quite a significant difference in terms of Revit's performance. So in small, medium-sized jobs, I've not really noticed much of an impact by turning on volumes. In terms of where the area is calculated from, either from the face of the wall, center of the wall, or what have you. So most people just leave it so that the area of the room is calculated from the finish of the wall. So rooms have volume. That obviously means that they've got a third dimension, not just area. So when I cut a section through the building, I'm going to be cutting through those room objects if they are turned on. So my visibility here, I'm just going to go down to rooms. So you can see they've been turned off. So now when I move my cursor over here, there's that one room object right there. So this is a vaulted space here. So if I wanted to define this room, I could drag it upwards like so. And what's happening here is that the roof is also room bounding, and it truncates that room object's volume. And you can see it's doing it here because of this little floor object that's running around the perimeter of the second floor. So you can see here it's calculating the volume. In Revit, these volumes of these spaces can be passed on to the mechanical engineer if they're using Revit, and they can use it as part of their mechanical design for doing HVAC. So if you're in section and you drag this thing up, you can change the room object so it spans multiple stories. And you can tag your rooms in section. So on the Annotate tab, or actually on the Architecture tab too, you can see you've got the Room tool, which is grayed out in section, but you've got the Tag Room tool, so I can tag a room in section. So there we go. There's our room tags. And of course, if I change the room name in section, it's going to change it back in plan. So I've changed the room number here. Revit's warning me that I've got 2 rooms with the same number. Go back and look in plan, and sure enough, it's changed the room number. Okay, now at the bottom of page 1 here, there's just a note that you can pre-add rooms to a room schedule. Does anybody here ever do a space plan before they start their design? It's typical for folks who are doing schools, so I've worked for some architects who, when you get the program of the building from the Ministry of Education includes the maximum sizes of the classrooms and maximum amount of corridor space that can be in a school, because obviously they're trying to keep the construction costs of the school under control. Revit can allow you to pre-create these rooms, so then when you're using the Room tool, you can grab them off this menu at the top and put them into your building. So you could have all the different rooms that are supposed to go into your building, their names, and the target area that you're looking for those rooms. So if you want to say that, you know, your classroom's not supposed to be any more than 1,000 square feet, you could put a column into your room schedule that says 1,000 square feet, and then you can compare it to the actual when you put it into your model. We'll look at that in a few minutes. Okay, any questions? There's one little thing that I do need to talk about here. When you are working with these room objects, so you can see these room separation lines I've got, if you've got a little gap like that, you can see that the room object remains sort of bounded, even though I've got a gap in this line. So if I didn't have a room separation line here, if I had a wall instead, so I'm just going to draw a little wall here, and I'm going to be just a little bit short of that room separation line. Still works. So as long as the gap doesn't get too big, say a foot, then it's all good. So here, let me just put a dimension on here. So as long as, and I found it varies from release to release. There's 10 inches. There's 11. Usually it's about 1 foot 1 where the room object begins to sort of leak into an adjacent space. There we go. So it's around 1 foot 3 where that begins to be a problem. So that was just a first bullet point on page 1. So as I mentioned, room objects are generally net areas inside your building. So it's just the area contained within the walls. Now often when we are doing area calculations on our projects, we need the areas calculated using a different set of criteria. Sometimes it's to the outside face of the wall, and sometimes if you're dealing with the Vancouver zoning bylaw, if you're using a rain screen wall, which we pretty much all are, you can offset your gross floor area 6 inches to the inside of the building from the outside face. So obviously the room object is not going to be able to handle those sorts of needs. Room objects are just your everyday labeling of spaces, and like I said, letting objects know that are inside those rooms which room they are in. So this takes us over to page 2 where we must talk about areas. Now areas require a little bit of setup. The first thing that you have to do is create what's called a scheme. And what the scheme does is it describes what the purpose of these plans is about, or what the purpose of these areas is about. Now unfortunately, when you are using these area features in Revit, they are not going to be seen in your regular floor plans. They are stored in a completely separate set of plans. So let's go to the Architecture tab here, and we're going to go to that room and area panel again. So Architecture, find the room and area title for the panel, click it, and we're going to open up Area and Volume Computations again. But this time we're going to go to the Area Schemes tab. So what we have here, this is the list of the different sets of plans, or the different kinds of areas that you might want to track or determine for your building. Now there's one that's provided. It's called gross building, and that one, as you can see, you can't do anything with it. You can't change its name. It's the sort of the out of the box set of areas, and I use them. I use the gross building area scheme quite a lot, but I might not use it for my zoning areas. I might use it for doing the total area to the outside of my walls versus how much corridor space I've got, or something like that.
Does that mean that you were doing?
Yes, gross building area to outside of walls. So you could use it for your building code areas, but whatever. So typically what I'll do is I will make a zoning area scheme, and then I will say area of the building per the Vancouver zoning bylaw. So this lets me know that this zoning area scheme will be used to show the areas of the building per the zoning bylaw. Then, because we have to deal with the building code at one point, so then I have another set of plans that will allow me to look at the area of the building per the building bylaw, Vancouver building bylaw, or if you're outside of Vancouver, using the BC building code. So if you're not in Vancouver, it would be per the BC building code, and so here might be Burnaby's zoning bylaw, whatever municipality you happen to be in. Okay, so you've got these three different schemes delineated. Now what happens is that you create area plans and you tell Revit which kind of areas you want to show in that plan. So again, from the Architecture tab, we're going to click the area drop down here and click Area Plan. So in the Area Plan dialog box, you choose which of the schemes you're intending to use to make these area plans. So it's going to list them all there. It's going to have the gross building at the top, and then the other ones that you've created in the list. So let's say that I am doing my building area. So I want to go right to the outside of the building. So I choose building. And because the building code only cares about the footprint area, the area I only need to look at is my overall building footprint to firewalls or outside face of wall, and that's on level 1. And I hit OK. Now, we're going to talk about area boundaries next. Revit is going to automatically add area boundary lines at my exterior walls. Now, I'm going to say yes in this case, but most of the time, you guys are probably going to want to say no, and I'll talk about why. So what's happened now is that Revit has created an area plan, and you can see that in brackets it gives the name of the scheme and then shows the area plan for the building scheme. The purple lines that you folks can see in the view are area boundaries. So when you are working inside an area plan, the area boundary tool becomes available. If you are in a regular floor plan, you can see that it is grayed out. and you cannot place area boundaries. Area plans are listed at the very bottom of your drawing list in the project browser, above your sheets. And so here, now that these area boundaries have been placed, I can put an area object inside that space. So here on the outside, you can see instead of a blue pale rectangle, it's a pale yellow rectangle. And you can see as soon as I put it inside those area boundaries, it now becomes an area. So you have to have your area boundaries in place before you could put in these area objects. Now, if this is the building code, this is not going to fly. That is not how the building code looks at area. Now, this is what's weird. You folks see how when I click on this area boundary, it's kind of a purple, but when I select it, it looks like this area boundary line is jogging in and out and in and out. That's on purpose. The area functionality in Revit is predicated on the rules for BOMA. That is Building Owners and Managers Association. So they are the organization that helps regulate and codify how we calculate leasable areas inside buildings. So when you're leasing a space, they get to the inside face of the wall or the inside face of glass, whichever is farthest to the outside. So here you can see that Revit detected where the face of the glass was and has moved that area line out. So that means this person is getting to rent the windowsill. That's how they make the big bucks. So that is how the area boundaries work if you do it automatically. So you remember that message that Revit said, Revit will put area boundaries on all exterior walls automatically, and I said yes. And remember I said you should say no because of this. Because most of the time we don't want to calculate our areas in this fashion. So I'm going to delete those lines. There's the one. And you notice as soon as I delete the first one, the area boundaries jump to the middle of the wall. I don't know why that happens. Anyway. So I just typed in IC for isolate category so I could separate or isolate all my area boundaries. HR to bring my walls back. Okay, so what I want to do now is put in my area boundaries. So when you put these area boundaries in, Revit defaults to the pick tool and applying area rules. So again, that's BOMA, which unless you're calculating leasable areas, you don't want to roll with that. So uncheck it.
So you said IC to isolate it, how do you apply?
HR. Right? HH, hide an object. HC, hide a whole category. HR, restore the visibility of those hidden objects, right? So I can click on a wall. HC hides all those walls. HR brings them back. Click on one of those walls. HH to hide just that wall. And you can see you get the blue boundary around the outside. HR to restore. Okay, so with the area boundary tool, it's okay to use pick, but don't use area rules because you don't want to be saddled with BOMA. So I'm going to use the pick tool, pick my outside of my wall, outside of my wall, outside of my wall, and here, outside. Now, if the area boundary didn't go all the way to the other corner, you could simply use the trim tool and pick your area boundary. Make sure you're trimming just the area boundary to the other area boundary. So you've got a nice, completely bounded area, because your area isn't going to be calculated unless you've got area boundaries completely around the whole thing. All right, so now I can put in my area here. Yeah. No, you got to put the lines in first. The area boundaries have to go in first and then the area. So the order is this. Number one, create the scheme. Number two, create the plans in the scheme. Those plans will not have area boundaries unless you say yes to that automatic feature, which we've shown. You don't want to do it anyway. So scheme first, then the area plans, then the area boundaries. Finally, put the areas inside the area boundaries like I'm doing right here. Okay, so there's my 3316 square feet. I'm going to rename my area to building area. Now I could make a room or an area schedule, but for my building area schedule I'd have one row, building area of 3316 square feet. So you know, with this in mind, now I can go over to 322 in the building code and I can figure out which one of the classifications I need to I get this into the right classification, and I'm off to the races in terms of setting up my building code compliance for this building. Now, zoning. What if I want to calculate the area of the building with regards to the zoning bylaw? Well, now I need to make a different area plan. So I'm going to go back to the area plan tool on the architecture tab, but this time I am going to choose zoning out of my list. And in this case, I'm going to choose all 3 floors, 2 and 3. So I just held down the control key there. So I'm going to make area plans for all 3 floors. They're going to be in a separate folder. I'm going to say no in all cases. No, no, no. So now I have 3 area plans. So if this was a building in Vancouver, this is what I do. I'd use the area boundary tool. And again, I'm going to turn off the area rules here. And I'm going to use the rectangle tool. It's just a rectangular building. And I'm going to set those lines in -6 inches. So when I draw my rectangle, it's going to set those area lines inside, so it makes my building's area smaller. There we go. So you know how the there's exclusions for storage, right? So let's say I've got storage underneath my stairs. I'll grab another rectangle here, draw another. Whoops, I still got offset on 0. There we go. There. So I've got this other set of area boundaries here, which means that when I put in my area here, it's excluding that area underneath the stairs. So now this area is the 6-inch exclusion on the outside of my walls. I'm not counting this area here, and this would be gross floor area. Gross floor area, level 1. So now I'd go up to the 2nd floor. Same thing here. Now this is going to be a little bit funkier because I've got my roof here. So where is the City of Vancouver going to allow me to cut off my area of my floor? I don't really know. I can't remember off the top of my head what happens when you've got interconnected floor space in the Vancouver zoning bylaw. But I'm just going to assume for now that this edge of the floor here will be the edge of my gross floor area. I might be entirely wrong on that one. So again, I'm going to use that rectangle tool with a -6 inches to make use of the building envelope or the rain screen offset. And I'm going to go from here over to just somewhere here along the outside wall. And then I'll use the move command and move that area boundary over to the edge of the floor. So on the one hand, this gives you pretty good freedom on calculating the areas of your building. The downside is that those area boundaries are just polylines, and they are just sitting there. They have no connection to the walls. So if you make modifications to your plan, so here if I grab my exterior wall here and I make this a couple feet bigger, area boundaries aren't going to go along for the ride. So you're going to have to come back in a second pass and move those area boundaries in the same manner that you made changes to your plan. So now I can put in my area object here. gross floor area level 2.
Is there a way to connect those lines, those boundaries to the walls?
Yeah, the only way you could do it is by using area rules, but then boom, BOMA. You're using BOMA rules at this point. So there's no way to attach them to the walls using area rules. There are some other things that you could do. You could do a dimension. So if you use a dimension from the outside of the wall to the area boundary, so you can see it's 6 inches, you could lock it. But I wouldn't recommend it. And that's just because it's not really going to save you that much effort. You're probably going to move your building in some ways that even having that locked dimension on there won't save you when you make the change. But you're welcome to try. I certainly wouldn't dissuade you from trying to make that happen. But I find that keeping your Revit model as loose as possible, you know, not locking anything, especially for the first couple of years while you're using the software, it's advisable. Just keep your model as loose as possible. What's the next thing I want to talk about here? So I would do the same process on level 3. Now I want to make special mention of the gross building area scheme for this reason. I'm going to make an area plan using the out-of-the-box gross building scheme. So this gross building area scheme comes with every file that you start with Revit, and you can't delete it and you can't rename it. Now whereas if you use any of the other area schemes that you create and you say automatically create those area boundaries with exterior walls, where did it put them? Inside face. If you use gross building, here I'm going to say automatically create it because with the gross building area scheme, it puts them to the outside of the face. So, you know, if you want to use that for whatever reason to get your area of the building to the outside face of the wall, this does it. And of course, because I automatically use the, you know, the automatic mode, let me, it's the same as this. So here, if I delete that area boundary and then put it in, and I use the area rules, see, as soon as you hit area rules, it sort of sticks to the wall. There we go. So now, of course, if I move my wall around, the area boundary will move with it. But again, the only area scheme that will permit that functionality is the gross building area scheme. So you might find some use for that.
Question: if you accidentally select the area rule on there, can you select the area boundary and change it to unbeing or
right? So the question is, if I have an area boundary that's placed right now, can I unlock it from that area rules feature? No. So you end up having to delete it and then reinstate it without the area rules checkbox. So then you just got to zoom in close and then tab select the outside of the wall. What? Oh, I had the offset on. That's why. Okay, I'm just putting area boundaries on top of each other here. Okay, so let's take a break for 10 minutes and then we shall come back.